This is Poly 101, a brief introduction to polyamory. We'll just cover the basics you need to know. The definition of polyamory is many loves. Polyamorous people do not limit themselves to a single romantic relationship. However, polyamory is not swinging, cheating, a huge orgy, an excuse to sleep around, or polygamy, which usually has kind of sexist implications. There are a few ways to do polyamory. There isn't a single correct way. The important thing is to remain ethical, and different types work for different people. So first we're going to go over hierarchical polyamory. And this pyramid can kind of show you how people rank their partners. A primary is usually at the top, then secondary and tertiary. And then beyond that, this is how one person ranked the people they were seeing. Other people might rank it differently. What I mean by ranking partners, it just doesn't mean that you like one best. It means that you rank partners based on time, your relationship length, if you want to have kids or have kids with that person, if you want to be married or are married to that person, and living together. Another type of polyamory is solo poly. In these relationships, usually, solo poly people don't want to live with or marry their partner. A lot of them consider themselves their primary, or sometimes even their friends. Being solo poly doesn't mean that you don't have deep and meaningful relationships, and this is a great option for people who want to remain independent and still be polyamorous. Relationship anarchy is a little hard to describe because it's defined by the people who are relationship anarchists. Basically, they choose what relationship style works for them and ignore societal norms. Sometimes they value friendships and non-romantic relationships as much as romantic. And beyond that, really, people just choose what relationship works for them and their partners. Before moving on to polyfidelity, we'll talk about some relationship formations. A quad is when you have 4 people who date each other. Not every single person has to be dating every single person, and we'll see that in the picture in the next slide. A triad is when 3 people date each other. V is a type of triad where 2 members are not having a romantic relationship, and the person who is having a romantic relationship with 2 members is called the hinge. Basically, the person in the V that dates both people. Here's a picture showing what we just talked about. In this first one, that's an example of a triad that's in a V formation. The green person would be the hinge. The next picture is a picture of a triad where everyone's dating everyone, which happens as well. And then we have quad formations, and as you can see, not every person has to be dating every person or even more than one person in the group. So moving on to polyfidelity, it's usually seen in small groups such as triads and quads, and all it means is that they date within their group but not outside their polycule or the clump of intermingled relationships that they have. When we talk about polyamory, we talk about how important being ethical is, and ethical non-monogamy is another, I guess, umbrella term over polyamory. Polyamory can get a bad rap when people claim to be poly when they're actually cheating, but cheating is absolutely not polyamory. Communication and honesty are crucial, and to remain ethical with your partners, you should practice safe sex, be honest with your partners, and be honest with yourself. Jealousy is one of the most asked about questions. Polyamorous people who are super experienced can still experience jealousy. It's especially common in new relationships or relationships that are being opened up. To get past jealousy, the best thing to do is to be aware of the underlying cause. Sometimes those are insecurities, and sometimes those are needs you aren't getting met. Learning how to address your jealousy is a big part of being a good partner to multiple people. Here are some common poly words that you would probably not hear unless you're involved in a polyamorous social group or discussion group. Feeling wibbly or having the wibbles. Those are moments of insecurity over seeing your partner with someone else. They're usually very short and fleeting. Schadenfreude is pleasure at someone's misfortune or pain, and what we strive for is Freude or compersion, which is the opposite of Schadenfreude. It's actually a pleasure as a result of seeing your partner happy, not necessarily coming from you. Here are some really common poly pitfalls, common mistakes that we make in poly relationships. The first one, and the one most common in newly poly people, is polysaturation. And that means you have too many partners and not enough resources. That could be time, energy, etc. Because polyamory is new and exciting, people have a tendency to try and date too many people and spread themselves too thin. Doing this can lead to you not treating your partners the best that you can, and so it's something you should be careful of. An overabundance of rules is also really common in new polyamory relationships and old. When polyamorous couples start out, they think that rules will help keep them from getting hurt, and those rules a lot of times come from insecurities, jealousy, or other problems in your relationship. Creating rules to limit you and your partner may become an emotional crutch instead of working through that jealousy and insecurity. My advice would be to talk about rules often and try and work to not have as many rules. And if you're working on yourself and working on your jealousy and insecurity, the less you will have to rely on having these rules. An example of a rule that I see all the time is the one penis policy. It doesn't actually protect feelings that much. It is usually coming from a place of insecurity, and if you work on it, then you should get to a point where you can feel happy that your partner is having sex with someone of the same gender as you. Safe sex and safety practices are not rules that you need to work on moving past, because safe sex is really important and really crucial if you're in a romantic or in sexual relationship with multiple people. Collecting partners, or Pokemon poly as I've also heard it called, is similar to polysaturation, where people get overzealous and they start collecting partners. What I mean by this is they're not dating and getting to know someone and working on their relationship. They're just collecting people like you would Pokemon. This leads to ignoring the needs of your partners and treating getting new partners like a conquest, which is not great for some obvious reasons. It's not considered ethical non-monogamy if you aren't really being cautious of this and caring about your partners. NRE, or new relationship energy, does not have to be a poly pitfall. Sometimes it's one of the great parts of polyamory. And NRE is that feeling you get with a new partner where everything is super exciting and you have butterflies and sparks, and NRE can be a good thing, but it can also lead to established relationships being neglected for the new and exciting relationship. It's important that if you value your current relationship or relationships, to not put them on the back burner for the person you're feeling NRE towards. This is a common problem in couples that start dating the same person, but it can be seen in different forms as well. Relationships at one side of the triangle in a triad may progress much slower than the other, which is okay. Be patient and don't try and force everyone to have the same emotional or sexual connection. A lot of times you will hit it off better or worse than your partner does with someone, because different people like different things. Polyamory is not a magic quick fix for your relationships. If you're a couple thinking about going into polyamory and opening up your relationship, you need to be aware that it's not going to just magically fix your relationship. It takes communication and emotional maturity to do poly and to do it well. If you already have some big problems with your partner, adding more people will complicate things, not make things better. It's also not ethical to put the burden of improving your relationship on a new person who isn't a part of those problems. And a lot of times that new person ends up being hurt, so be careful about that. Don't isolate relationships or force them to combine. Never letting your partners meet or date if they're interested in each other can cut you off from some of the best parts of polyamory. It's sometimes less ethical. Some people keep those relationships separate because they're not being honest with their partners. I've found that meeting metamors helps a lot with jealousy because you no longer have them up on a pedestal thinking that they must be so amazing. They become a person with flaws and character. Forcing people together when they don't hit it off is also ill-advised. I mean, you don't have to be best friends with all your metamors. I think it's important to be able to get along, of course, but if you just don't click, that's okay. Don't worry about trying to fit your relationship into a mold of what you think it should look like. There's different types of poly and different ways to do it. I recommend trying it out to see what's best for you. Deciding your relationships must fit into a small box prevents you from growing in that relationship, and you should try and avoid it and let your relationships take you where they will. Lack of emotional honesty is a really big problem in polyamory. I recommend only getting into polyamory if you're ready to be emotionally honest with yourself and your partners, because polyamory sometimes involves really tough conversations that really demand a level of emotional honesty and maturity. Avoid people who don't get it. Not all people new to polyamory are bad and should be avoided. That's not necessarily true. But be careful with people who don't understand poly, the people who are saying it's poly and cheating or not being ethical in some other form. Sometimes these people go back to monogamy and hurt the people that they've been dating, and obviously some cheat and call it polyamory, and those people can lead to some big problems in not only that relationship, but your surrounding relationships. So in this slide I say don't unicorn hunt. More what I mean is don't unicorn hunt unethically. Unicorn hunting is when a couple looks for a bisexual person to join their relationship. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but some problems are that a lot of times the couple expects the unicorn to come in and fix all their relationship problems, which doesn't happen. And a lot of times they also expect the unicorn to come in their relationship and remain second best to that primary relationship. I have also seen couples looking for unicorns where they want to treat the unicorn as their secondary, but they are not okay with the unicorn seeing anyone else, which is not really fair. And try to remember that unicorns are people too, as silly as that sounds. Don't rush into relationships. This applies to both monogamy and polyamory, but a lot of times polyamorous people get really excited and can rush into relationships without communicating about the needs of their current partners and their new partners. There's a few conversations that you need to have before jumping into a relationship with a new person, including conversations about safe sex, the boundaries of your current partners, and etc. Just like you shouldn't assume that polyamory can fix all your problems, if you're in a polyamorous relationship, don't assume that all your problems are caused by polyamory. All relationships have struggles, and a lot of times the same problems that people in polyamorous relationships face are there in monogamy. Don't assume all the issues that you run into are poly-related. Sometimes they are just common problems in relationships. Moving on to a little vocabulary. I've mentioned metamor. Metamor is your partner's partner. Paramour is your lover. I usually use partner, but paramour works too. Kitchen table poly. These are from the cartoon Kimchi Cuddles, which are great. You should look them up. So kitchen table poly is when your relationships and partners cross over and interact with each other. I've found this to be my favorite way of doing polyamory. I like to be friends with metamors. I like to get to know them. And so I would recommend that. Parallel poly relationships aren't necessarily bad, but they can involve not being honest in some cases, so just be careful of that. And parallel poly is when relationships don't cross over. You don't get to know your metamors. You don't get to know your partner's partner. Consent is also super important in polyamory. If you aren't sure if someone will receive your actions, like even as much as kissing them, go ahead and ask them. You might feel silly asking if you can kiss them, but a lot of people think this consent is sexy. It shows confidence and respect for your partner or this person you might want to date. Additional resources that help with poly. The Ethical Slut is a good book, but it's also very old. I would say More Than Two is probably one of the best resources on polyamory. It's a book, and also you can find a lot of resources if you just Google More Than Two. The Husband Swap I've never read. I don't know much about it, but Thorntree Press Publishing Company is coming out with even more poly books. If you live in Denver or Colorado, the Boulder Polyamory discussion group is a great resource as well.